Hey everybody, welcome back to Franchise Player, and I don't know why lately, but I've had a huge itch to go back and check out some GameCube games. So I thought it'd be really fun to go back to the GameCube library and check out 5 games that I think still hold up for the GameCube in 2025. It's hard to believe this console is over 2 decades old now. It makes me feel super old myself, but without further ado, let's jump right into these 5 awesome games. And first up here, we're starting off strong. We're checking out Smugglers Run War Zones, which released for the GameCube on August 6th of 2002. Now, Smugglers Run, just as a series, is a series that I'm super nostalgic for, and thinking back is actually probably the first Rockstar game that I actually ever played. I remember one of my older cousins, who was way older than me, I think he was like 10 years older than me, had a copy of the first Smugglers Run on PS2, and I remember just watching him play it and playing it with him and thinking it was like the coolest thing ever. So thought it'd be really cool to go back and check out Smugglers Run War Zones on GameCube. I actually didn't know this until fairly recently, but this game is actually just a port of the second game on GameCube, and they decided to rename it. I'm assuming because the first one isn't on GameCube, but regardless, this game is still, classic Smugglers Run fun. And if you've never played Smugglers Run, essentially fairly basic game, right? Where you're just a smuggler delivering, illegal cargo and goods in a certain amount of time going throughout a course. So the game is not some crazy concept. It's just great, fun, pick up and play action, which from a 6th gen game is quite frankly, pretty much all I want. After doing some research on this port to the GameCube, it looks like it actually got a 79 on Metacritic, so pretty solid review, especially for the time, and I guess it was even nominated by GameSpot back in the day for Best Driving Game on GameCube in 2002. So yeah, this game definitely got some pretty positive reviews overall, and I remember this franchise just in general back then was, fairly popular. But yeah, I think this one is fun to go back to. Not a ton, under the hood, right? It's not like there's a ton of game modes or, hundreds of vehicles, but the vehicles or, buggies, ATVs that are here are pretty fun to mess around with and drive. Not a ton of game modes available, but the ones that are here are pretty cool. And like I said, I mean, this game is great for just pick up and play, hop on, maybe do a couple levels, and, you're on your way. So, with this being a Rockstar game, I definitely think it holds up well. Anything from Rockstar during this time period specifically, I think it's pretty much stood the test of time. So if you've never played Smugglers Run, definitely check it out, whether it's the first one or this one here on GameCube. I would definitely recommend it. And next up here, we have Wario World, which released here in North America in June of 2003 for the GameCube. And I have no idea why Nintendo has not gone back and created another Wario Land or Wario World game, because this game holds up extremely well and I think is even a little underrated. I don't know about you, but I actually never played this on GameCube growing up. I don't even think I knew anybody who owned this game. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but Wario World, I just remember not really being out and about, at least when I was in like elementary school back when this was out. And, funny enough, this game actually sold well enough and performed well enough to get the Player's Choice treatment by Nintendo, which I really wish they'd bring back some kind of Player's Choice to make some of the, Switch games in particular a little more affordable. At least during the recording of this video, I don't think that'll change, but to my knowledge, this was the first and only 3D Wario game that was ever made. So I don't know why that they have not really revisited Wario other than like the WarioWare games. Don't get me wrong, those are cool, like micro and like mini games, but I think Wario definitely deserves another 3D adventure. If you haven't played Wario World, highly recommend it. This game is super fun, and if you're really just a fan of kind of the feel and aesthetic of the Wario games, definitely check out Wario Land on the Game Boy Color, and then the GBA release as well. Definitely a little different than like traditional Mario style gameplay. In my opinion, I actually think I prefer it a little bit. Overall, I think this game has actually held up well in a few different areas. One being the graphics, and that's an area where luckily Nintendo games really shine. Like Nintendo historically never really goes for that like lifelike feel and like hyper modern graphic style. The graphic style they go with, even on some older N64 games, in my opinion, still holds up really well. So the graphics are good. I think the soundtrack is pretty solid. Wario soundtracks are always a little different, a little funky, and then the level design is solid. So this is not like some open world 3D game. It's still very much like a side-scrolling game. But overall, I think the levels flow pretty well. I think some of them can kind of drag on a bit. But overall, solid game, especially for the age with this being over 2 decades old. So Nintendo, if you're out there listening, I think any fan at this point would happily take a remake or a remaster at this point. Drop it for the Switch too. Hell, even drop it on the original Switch at this point for 40, $50. And I'm sure many people will happily line up and buy this, myself included. So if you've never played this, definitely give it a shot. Next up here, we have True Crime Streets of LA, which released on November 4th, 2003. True Crime Streets of LA has you playing as a LAPD detective, and his name is Nick Kang. Character-wise, looking back, I think he is very much kind of like a 2000s loose cannon cop character, which is, for what it is, man, it's a piece of the time. I actually think it's kind of funny how it holds up. Now, if it's your first time going back and playing this, you might be like, oh my God, this is so cheesy. But if you grew up playing this or grew up in this era, I think you'll really enjoy the character. When this originally came out, a lot of people viewed this as pretty much a GTA clone. And I guess I could see where the comparisons kind of come from, right? Open world, you're in a car. But I actually think this game is a lot more than just a GTA clone. And, with this being a game from the early 2000s, right? This was a game that I don't even know how I had found out about or where I ended up buying it from. But I had this on my GameCube. That's the main system I played it on, even though it's on PS2 and the original Xbox. But this was a cool era because, in the early 2000s, it's not like you had YouTube and a bunch of online forums like you have nowadays to go on and basically research games and find out if they're good or not. So I don't know, like I said, how I got this game, but I managed to get my hands on it and loved it. Like I remember telling, all my friends at school about this game. I remember I actually ended up giving this game to one of my cousins and he loved it and beat it too. So this was a cool era where, not every game you kind of knew like the back of your hand before you had it. And you really had to kind of go out there and find other games on your own and kind of do your own homework. So yeah, I understand, like I said, how a lot of people probably thought this was a Grand Theft Auto clone, but I think this game actually has significantly better combat than GTA, which wouldn't take much from the PS2 era, but yeah, definitely a lot more to it than what meets the eye. When I was going back and kind of doing some homework on some of these games that I was going to be talking about today, I actually didn't know this about True Crime Streets of LA, but I guess back in the day when they were creating this game, is they actually captured 240 square miles of LA to feature, real areas like Beverly Hills, for example, right? Super famous area down in SoCal. And I didn't know that growing up, but I always thought it was a really cool map, and it seemed, and the map seemed realistic for the time. So kind of cool to see how they did that, especially in 2003. That's pretty wild to think about, and it really makes you wonder, hey, if they created a game today, how wild of a map they would create. One other cool thing that this game did was it actually featured some celebrity voice actors. So one right here, you have Michelle Rodriguez. You might know her, from the Fast and Furious films. And then you also have Christopher Walken. I remember hearing the Christopher Walken character when I was a kid and just thinking it was so cool that there was a celebrity I knew that was in a video game. Obviously, that's a lot more common nowadays than it was back then, but a nice little touch for a game from '03. And one last kind of fun fact about this game, if you're interested in a sequel, other than True Crime Streets of New York, is the game Sleeping Dogs that I know a lot of people like. If you didn't already know, it's actually a spiritual successor to this game. Would definitely like to see another true crime game later on, but I don't know if we'll ever see it. So if you want to go back, I definitely think this is worth playing too. And with number 4 here on the list, we have MVP Baseball 2005, which released here in North America February 22nd of 2005. If you were around in this era, like specifically the prime of the GameCube, the PS2, and the original Xbox, gamers were, I would say, absolutely blessed with sports games. But MVP Baseball 2005 was really in a league of its own. The game modes that you had, you could do basically a dynasty mode, doing what I think was 120 seasons that they allowed you to do, which back for 2005 was pretty much unheard of. All of the different game modes. This was unreal for the time, and it still holds up. A lot of people actually still consider MVP Baseball 2005 to be the best baseball game of all time. And to be honest, at least from my perspective, I can't even think of a baseball game that even really comes close to this. One of the game modes that I really liked in MVP 05 was this hitting game mode right here. And it was super cool, man. They had these nice ramps that the ball could travel up on. There was these vortexes where if your ball got stuck in there, it would basically shoot it out and you'd lose points. The tractors that you can see in the outfield there, if you hit them, you'd get bonus points. Of course, hitting cars, in the outfield if you hit a homer. So I remember I sank God knows how many hours into this mini game mode. And then there was a really cool pitching game mode too. So this was a really fun game mode where you can kind of, hone your hitting skills, and it really felt arcadey. So it was kind of the best of both worlds. The Dynasty mode really allowed for a ton of replayability, and especially for those guys who like to do sims and kind of rebuilds with teams and simulate and see how stacked you can get your squad. So this game allowed you to do up to 120 seasons. On top of that, the commentary was incredible with Kruk and Kipe. I grew up, really liking the Giants as a kid, and to hear them in a video game, just like in real life, really made this game almost feel like you were watching it and playing, a TV broadcast at the time. So I think, with that in-depth, Dynasty mode, the commentary, which I think has held up fairly well, and then the gameplay has really helped this game, stand the test of time. And then there's a really hardcore fan base that still plays this and actually updates rosters for you as well. So, if you're not really wanting to, join MLB The Show and, sink your money into that franchise, which I think has got really stagnant, you might want to take a look back at MVP Baseball 2005 and give it a shot, whether it's on, here on GameCube, PS2, or the original Xbox. And last but not least here, we have a game that I think is a little underrated, doesn't necessarily reinvent the wheel by any means, but I think holds up, well in a couple different ways, not only graphically, but with the gameplay. And that is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which released here in North America, October 21st of 2003. So if you don't know, or maybe you just weren't around at the time, this game was based upon the 2003 TV series, which I loved as a kid. I was a huge fan of watching this on TV. I had a couple of the action figures from the show even, but sadly, I did not own this full game. If anyone remembers jam packs that were on PS2, I remember playing this game on a jam pack. So it was like the demo of a game just over and over and over again because I never had the actual game. So I thought it was really fun to actually go back to this game, on GameCube and give it a proper playthrough past basically whatever level they had on the jam pack back then. So I went back before recording the gameplay for this, and I went and looked at some reviews for this just to see, how much I might have been blinded by nostalgia. And the reviews on this game were pretty rough back in the day. It looks like people, weren't too fond of how repetitive the game was. Here's my thing, right? This is just a 3D basic, arcade beat 'em up essentially that's based off a TV show. So developed and published by Konami. It's a beat 'em up. My whole thing is like, hey man, like most beat 'em ups are going to be fairly repetitive. And, hey, maybe back then, maybe in the early 2000s, people were kind of burnt out on, 90s beat 'em ups and they didn't really want to see more beat 'em ups. But, personally, I enjoyed this game. I'm probably super biased, especially with liking the TV show and like never having this full game. So I don't know. I mean, reviews aside, I think this game's enjoyable. And I think the graphics have aged pretty well on this too. Yeah, like definitely a repetitive game. But if you're a fan of TMNT, if you were a fan of that early 2000s TV series, I think this might be worth a playthrough just for the nostalgia alone. But yeah, guys, that'll pretty much do it for today's video. Had a lot of fun, checking out some old GameCube games that I think still hold up today. And then I recently did one of these on the Dreamcast as well. So I might turn this into a series, for the next console that I, might want to do 5 games that still hold up for. I think would either be probably the PS2 or maybe even the GBA. So yeah, as usual, appreciate you guys for watching. Let me know some GameCube games that you like, or maybe some GameCube games that you think still hold up. I know GameCube games are crazy expensive, so a little difficult to collect for the system. But yeah, thanks for sticking around, and we'll catch you soon with another video.